Welcome everyone to this week's version of Beat Teacher Burnout on my podcast. I'm Rowena Hicks, and this week I'm so excited because I have Anna Pluck, who is a psychotherapist, and she helps professionals overcome workplace anxiety, burnout, and overwhelm. So welcome, Anna. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm so excited because the teachers and leaders who are listening, and other school staff actually, and others, are many of whom are experiencing anxiety, overwhelm, trying to do life differently, do it better, are keen to hear what strategies you've got to share. And I know you work in a therapeutic way, and you have some really, practical strategies that you could share with people. Would you like just to launch in? Tell us a little bit about you, and then share some of your nuggets of gold.
Yeah, of course. So, as you said, my name's Anna, and I specialise in anxiety. And I became a therapist, I think, sort of 5 years ago. And before that, I used to work in HR, and I was getting really sort of burnt out in that. So I think my experience then kind of led me on to specialising in anxiety and burnout. And I think what I understand about anxiety now is that it's not always caused by one big stressful event. And I think that people often kind of think that in order to have anxiety, something big and traumatic must have happened to you. I think sometimes people can struggle with anxiety just because of lots of kind of smaller things that kind of gradually chip away at them over time. And if that's the case, then sometimes sort of analysing your triggers and making some tweaks can kind of help reduce the mental load that the anxiety is causing. So, yeah, not everybody needs to have lots and lots of psychotherapy. You know, it depends on what the causes of it are, basically.
Yeah. So that's lovely that you've sort of experienced a little bit of what you support people in. I'm not lovely that you had that experience, but amazing that you have the life experience to be able to offer then your skills and your training on top. What would be one of your top tips, do you think?
So I think sometimes it can be really good to really understand yourself, and a good way of doing that is to get in touch with what your values are, because I think a major source of anxiety is trying to live away from your kind of true self. And that can be because your lifestyle or your job or the society you live in is kind of pushing you away from that and kind of forcing you to be somebody that you're not. So a good way of developing that self-awareness and kind of understanding who you are is to become aware of your values. And we've all got our own personal values. There's no right or wrong there. And I know that's something you've talked about in your book, isn't it? You know, doing that. And I think that's a really good idea, just to reflect on your values. And I kind of suggest that people kind of revisit that from time to time, because they can change over time. As your life changes, different things take on more significance. But once you kind of know what your values are, then you can do some sort of reflection over, am I actually living in line with my values? So if one of your values is creativity, but you're not doing anything remotely creative in your life, then you're bound to be stressed and unhappy. So then if you know that, then, you know, you can look at ways of introducing some more creativity into your life, or, you know, so it's that. I think that's a really good way of starting that. I don't know, would you kind of say the same thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And the thing that in schools that I've worked on in schools is looking at what each individual person's values are. So they identify them themselves. Mm-hmm. And then looking at in the team, I mean, it links with your strengths, of course, mm-hmm. but then looking in the team, if there are people who have different values and different strengths, and then perhaps some people could help each other with different tasks, or maybe, you know, for example, with creativity, I think for teachers, it's really difficult because sometimes the curriculum is given to us in a very prescriptive way these days. And we often feel that we're not allowed to be creative. And we've come into the role of teacher to be creative, to share our passion, and to have this love of learning transferred to these students. And sometimes our creativity hat is pushed right down and almost hidden away. And so I think to recognize what your value is, and then to make sure that you can express that and you are living true to it is crucial. So I spoke to a teacher in London who, she said that she just didn't have the capacity. She went into teaching because she's so creative, and that's the bit of the job she loves the most. She didn't have the capacity. She was getting burnt out. So what she did is one lesson a day. She really enabled herself to be creative, and that enabled her values to be expressed. And she felt much calmer as a result, interestingly, but she couldn't do it all day, every day. She didn't have the capacity.
Right. So yeah, so then there's that kind of finding out how you can fit it in and ensuring that you do fit it in. And I think sometimes as well, it might be that you can't express all your values through your work. You might have to find a way of doing it in personal life as well. But yeah, it's yeah.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like, Anna?
So I think one of my really strong values is kind of like peacefulness or tranquility. So I really need to make sure that when I'm at home, and I think I'm a huge introvert as well, that I have time where I am just really quiet, so, I have to be away from people for a little while and just relax. And if I don't do that, every day or nearly every day, I will very quickly become very stressed. So yeah, that is a big one for me. And on a really busy day or a really stressful day, it might even be that I just sort of, when I get home, I just sit in the car for 10 minutes before I go in the house, and that can be enough. But I need something. Yeah.
So that really is demonstrating the importance of knowing our values and what we need. Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, so let's go back to really practical ideas. What other practical ideas have you got that would help sort of everyday living? Some strategies that you could share.
Okay, so a big part of what I do is cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT, and that is really good for some sort of practical suggestions for dealing with things. So there's a part of CBT that involves kind of understanding your unhelpful thinking styles. They're also sometimes called cognitive distortions, but I like to call them unhelpful thinking styles because I think that's less jargony. Yes. But I think if you can recognise in yourself which ones you use a lot, then you can kind of pick up when you're doing it. So I think a really big one is catastrophizing, and I think that's kind of so well known. That's, most people have heard of that, but catastrophizing is kind of when something happens, you immediately think of the absolute kind of worst case scenario that could be. So, that could mean, you're at home and you suddenly remember that you've forgotten to do something in work, and then you immediately think, oh my gosh, this is terrible, I'm going to get into loads of trouble for this, I'm going to lose my job, or something like that, when the reality is it's almost certainly not that serious. So sometimes it can be really good to kind of notice when you're doing that, and then that kind of, if you're doing it can kind of help to stop it. And another one that's a big one is what's called mind reading. And that is sort of assuming that you know what other people are thinking. And most people who mind read will assume that other people are thinking badly of them. And I can imagine if you're a teacher, that is probably a big one, because if you're a teacher, you probably want your students to like you and think well of you. And you also will want your colleagues and other staff in the school to like you and think well of you. So if you have to enforce discipline in the classroom, or, if you have to make unpopular decisions, then, if you're mind reading, that could cause you to feel really worried and stressed that, people don't like you, and you'd make that assumption. So I think being aware of that sometimes as well. And what I'll often say to people, is that if you're talking to someone and they seem a little bit off, that could just be because they're tired, or they might be really stressed out themselves. So, but if you mind read, you'll assume that they're doing that because they don't like you. So it's getting that awareness as well.
Yeah. I love both of those, because I do both of those.
I do
And
as well.
yeah. And I think one of the things that's helped me the most is journaling. And actually, I've got a journal just coming out. And this morning, one of the prompts, because I'm going through my journal and working through it myself again, and one of the prompts was, what am I not looking forward to today? And what is the worst thing that could happen? And what is the best outcome that could happen with it? And what can I do about it? And I had a meeting earlier today that I was just dreading, and I wasn't sure how the person was going to react. And so I didn't sleep terribly well because of it. And I've just had that meeting, and of course it didn't go nearly as badly as I thought. So I had catastrophized it, and I had second guessed what they were thinking about me and the idea and all this sort of thing. And actually, we do ourselves damage, don't we, when we do this sort of destructive thinking pattern. And apart from journaling, what else would you say would help people?
Okay. And just to go back onto the journaling, I think it's a good idea as well, because when people do journal, you can kind of look back and you can be like, do you remember that time when I had that awful sense of dread and I've written about it and it really wasn't that bad? So even just to review your journals can be really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for other things to help people, I think there's some really good techniques in CBT as well, called Socratic questioning. So I've got some examples of that on my website that you can look at free. But basically, it's a way of thinking through a problem, and it's sort of guided questions that can help you think through it, a bit like in the example of your journal. So, for example, one of the questions that I would suggest people ask themselves is there another way of looking at this? How might a friend look at this? So if you are catastrophizing, your friend might say to you, is it really that bad? Could there be another way of looking at this? And another question is, what one small thing can I do right now to help myself feel better? And I think that can be a really good one as well, because if you're stuck in like overwhelm and stress, it can be a bit like being a deer caught in headlights. But if you ask yourself that question, what one small thing can I do right now? And that could be put my pajamas on and, sit on the sofa with a cup of tea. That might be what you need, or it might be go out for a walk. But just to ask yourself that question, it can help move you out of the overwhelm and into solution mode. So, yeah.
I love that. And probably every week in my journal, because it's a 52-week journal, I have that prompt of what one small thing could I do today to change something? Because I'm a great believer in, I think you mentioned earlier something about, taking big steps, or actually small steps consistently embedded is much more helpful. We can't change ourselves overnight. We all know we have bad habits, but actually it's about tiny little steps each day. I was saying to someone yesterday that they needed to do some exercise. And I said, why don't you try tomorrow 1 minute, and then the next day 2 minutes, and the next day 3 minutes. So you build up really slowly, and then you don't have the overwhelm of the, oh gosh, I've got to get half an hour's exercise in, having done none. And I think that we need to be a bit kind to ourselves in all of this as well, don't you, Anna? That because we're very judgmental of ourselves and critical of ourselves.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there's one of the founders of kind of person-centered counselling, Carl Rogers, said, and I think this is so true, it's only when we accept ourselves as we really are that we can truly change. And I think sometimes in our culture, there's this idea that if you suddenly manage to do an hour of yoga every day and you do half an hour of meditation and drink smoothies, that you're then going to be good enough and you're going to be, okay with yourself. But actually doing that doesn't help you. But accepting yourself as you are, and then feeling like, yes, I'm good enough as I am, that then enables you to do the things that will take care of yourself and look after yourself. So then you kind of think, well, I'll do some yoga because it makes me feel good and it nurtures me. Not, I'm going to do some yoga because I'm a hopeless, useless person and that will make me into a better person. And I think if you can change that mind shift slightly, it helps you embed the habits as well.
Okay, so can you talk a bit more about that? So the mindset that you've got about yourself and about who you are and how that impacts your your view of your life and how you can help yourself?
So basically, I think a lot of people feel that there's something wrong with them and that they need to change themselves in some way. And I think in some ways that's reinforced by sort of TikTok and social media psychology, which sometimes has some good stuff on it, but a lot of the time it doesn't. And there's these kind of challenges like, the 75-day hard or whatever, where it says, you get up really early and you journal for half an hour, and then you go for a run, and then you drink a smoothie, and and it's like you've got to get up at 5 a.m. to do all of that. And you kind of think, okay, I'll do that, and then I'll suddenly be a high achiever. But then what happens is you do it for 2 days, you're absolutely exhausted, and you fail. But none of those things are inherently bad. I think journaling's like a really brilliant tool. Yoga's a really good thing, but it's about, are you doing those things because you value yourself and you want to look after yourself, or are you doing those things because you think there's something wrong with me and I need to fix myself? It's about having that change in your mindset, so that you eat vegetables, not because like I'm fat and I need to lose weight, because if I lose weight suddenly people will like me. You eat vegetables because vegetables are good for you, and if you eat vegetables you'll be healthier and you'll feel better, and you're a good person, so you deserve to feel good. Yeah, does that make sense?
Totally. And I love that, because really you're saying, unless we value ourselves, we can't be the best version of ourselves, but also we can't help others around us. We can't support those around us to understand their value either.
Exactly, yeah. And if you feel bad about yourself, how can you model good self-care and looking after yourself and nourishing yourself to other people? Because what you would pass on if you're a teacher to your students is the only way to achieve what you want to achieve in life is to basically be really hard on yourself and beat yourself up. And it's setting good boundaries for yourself and modeling that to others as well, I think.
Yeah, well, I think as teachers we really struggle with boundaries, because saying no to someone in authority is really tough, because we know that our whole team is overwhelmed, and some manage it better than others and have good strategies. But for me, one of the issues has always been how to say no, or how to say not now, or kindly and gently but firmly say, actually, I can't do that. Or if I do that, something else has to drop. And that's a real tough one, I think, for school staff.
I can imagine it must be. And I think that is such a difficult one to deal with, because it's kind of really going into the realm of kind of like politics and policy, isn't it? Because a lot of what you have to do as school, it's dictated to, isn't it, by, the government, Ofsted, and you have limited resources. So I kind of imagine that you're being asked to do things, but you don't have enough resources to do them. And this is something that I kind of struggle with as a psychotherapist, because quite often, like, the problems that get brought to me are like, people wanting to learn how to change themselves to fit into the mold that they're being forced to fit into, when actually they shouldn't be trying to fit into that mold. It's not right that they're being asked to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we need, that I think that, a lot of people in the public sector, they need more support, they need more resources, they need more staff, whether that is the education sector or, the NHS or, well, probably all the public sector things.
Yeah. Wow. That's I can't believe all the goals that you've given us in this. I know it's only 20 minutes, but thank you so much, Anna. I've taken such a lot from this. And I suppose one of the key messages in my book is learning to value yourself. Then you can be the best version of you. And then you can also support others to value themselves. And that's been a theme coming through your podcast, because as as this podcast, because as you say, you can't, if you're trying to change yourself to fit into your role, your job, the expectations of those around you, you are going to get very stressed and ultimately probably burn out. And that's very unhealthy. So it's people needing to have the confidence really to know who they are, what their values are, and to stick with that, which means you may need to be able to say no, or that doesn't align with me, which is tough. Anna, if people want to get hold of you, where do they go? Where do they get that questioning sheet, for example? What's your website link?
Okay, it's annapluck.com. And then there's a tab with free resources on it. So if you click on that, it's on there. And I've also got some blogs on there as well that can be that I've got some sort of practical tips on as well. So yeah, on there.
Fantastic. Well, Anna, I really appreciate that, and I'll put the link to your to how people can find you in the bio of this as well. And
thank you.
We really appreciate your time. So thank you so much, and thank you for listening, everybody. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. I hope you took something of value from today. If you want to connect, I'm at rowenahicks.com, or I have a Facebook group, which is Preventing Teacher Burnout. So I look forward to connecting to you at one of those.